Welcome back to the next video in our Learn to Code series. We're using Roblox to learn the code. Today we're going to go over some of the basic foundations, including variables and just basic math and coding. So stay tuned, let's roll the intro and get right into it. Right, so computer memory can store info that can be changed or updated throughout a program, and one of the most common ways for us, the programmer, to store data is by using variables. So it uses the same name as in math algebra, right? But in programming, a variable is actually just a container for a value of some sort. A good way to think of it is kind of thinking of it like a box. Let's say this part is a box here, and let's go ahead and actually select this. Let's add a surface GUI. And on here, we'll do a text label. This is not really part of this, but so you'll see this box has a label on it, right? I'm gonna go ahead and scale this, and we'll even make it more box-like. All right, so we have this label here, and what's happening with this label is this is the name of our box. So we can store any value we want inside of our box. And anytime we then refer to the name of our box, right, of our variable, it's actually going to be the same as referring to the value that's in there, right? So we can store a near endless amount of variables in our system and even make changes to the values stored within any time. So to store this information, we first need to declare or create a new variable. Let's go ahead and jump into a script here. I'll go ahead and put one inside a server script service. I'll do just a normal script. I'm going to rename this variables and math. All right, so we'll get rid of our print world here. Hello world. So in Lua, we use the keyword local followed by the variable name. I'm going to go ahead and use X in this case. So using the box analogy, this makes a box with the label X. Let me go ahead and go into here, and this is now the same as this, right? So now we have a box. The name is X, the label on the box is X. So let's briefly talk about why we use local. All right, so if left out, we create what's called a global variable, which I mentioned briefly in a previous video, but we'll talk more about it in the future. We try to avoid making global variables so as not to clutter the global environment and put unnecessary variables in there. It's good programming practice to do that. So another thing to note is using a specific format to the way that we name our specific naming convention for naming variables and other things in Lua. So each language has their own best practice for a lot of things, including those naming conventions. And in our case, we're going to use camel case. So we'll go ahead and use a comment here. So for example, camel case spelled that way. So you'll see that I'm starting the first word in lowercase. Everything is in lowercase, in fact, except for the next word in the name, in which case that starts with an uppercase. So if I were to do, let's say time of day, right? I would do time, capital O-F, capital D-A-Y. That way, instead of having spaces, because we can't have spaces in our code, we would instead denote where the spaces are essentially for each individual word to be a different word by capitalizing them, again leaving the first letter of the entire name in lowercase though. All right, so back over to our variable X. So we can now assign this a value. So to do that, we're going to use X, we're going to use the equal sign, and then we'll use, and we'll give it a value. In our case, we'll say 7. So the equal symbol in programming is not used the same way as you may be used to. So this is actually what's called the assignment operator. The way that this actually reads is X is assigned the value 7, right? So anything to the right of our assignment operator gets stored inside of our memory under the label X, is a good way to think of that. So if we think of our box now, we have placed, in this case, the number 7 inside our box. So if we were able to get into this box, we could put a number 7 in here, and that would be, anytime we refer to X, it's going to be 7. So we can also declare and initialize the variable in the same line. So for example, instead of doing that, we would just do x, use our assignment operator and the number 7 in this case. And this will work exactly the same. In fact, this is a more common practice. There are reasons you might not do it like this for specific variables, though that will come in very specific circumstances. So if we come across one of those in the future, we'll definitely go over that. So now the value 7 is saved into memory. We can access it anytime we want simply by calling this variable name. So if we wanted to change the value in our variable, we can do that as well. We basically would just do kind of the same thing we did earlier. So now we're assigning the value 42 to x. One thing to note is that this is now going to be the new value of x. So if you call x anywhere down here in your program, it's going to be 42. If you call x anywhere in here in your program, it's going to be the number 7. And that is because you can only store one value in a variable at a time. So this completely overwrites the 7 that was in here. 7 is discarded, 42 is now what is in there. So what kinds of values can we store in a variable? Well, some of the basic data types that we can store in variables are numbers, booleans, and strings. So let's dive a little deeper into each. So in Lua, all numbers are a general number type. In a lot of other languages, they will denote a difference between an integer and a floating point number or a double. We don't have to worry about that in Lua. A number is a number. So if we do, and we'll just keep using x. If we do x is 10, right, that is a number, not just an integer because it's a whole number, but it is a number. Also, if we make -10, that's still an integer, but it's just a number in Lua. And same thing if we did like 13.5. Even though it has a fractional value, a decimal place, this is still just a number in Lua, so it's kind of nice we don't have to worry about that. A Boolean data type, on the other hand, is going to either be true or false. So this is just a true or false value, yes or no, on or off. There's lots of ways to think about that. If we look at our part over here and we go into our properties, you can see anywhere there's a checkbox, this is actually a Boolean value, is what this is doing here. So for example, we can see the anchored property. This is one you'll come across quite often. So if we have a part in our world like this one, and we lift it off the ground a little bit, if anchored is unchecked, in other words false, and we go ahead and run the game, you'll see that it falls down. It is susceptible to gravity, it's susceptible to any forces of, oh yeah, I forgot we had that script going. Any forces that can affect physics. For example, the player can walk up and push that part around, for example. Whereas if we have the anchored box checked so that this is true and we run the game, it's going to remain stationary where it's at. Our grow script should still kick in. It's going to grow real big. Yeah, there it goes. But that's something to note, and we could actually change that in code by saying, by using a Boolean value. It's also good to note that you can change the data types of a variable to anything else, so I don't have to, once I've made this a number, I don't always have to keep it a number. I can come in here and I can make this a Boolean now. It's also good to note that I'm using a lowercase t here, right? So the first letter is lowercase in true or false. Other languages you might have to use a capital letter, so keep that in mind. If you are coming from another language, in Lua, it's going to be all lowercase for our Booleans. And then lastly, there's the string data type. So we saw this with our hello world example, right? So now we're using hello world. All right, so we use the double quotes for our strings. Again, you could use single quotes. If you watched any of my previous videos, you'll know that I mentioned using single quotes is kind of bad, especially if, you know, if we have this inside of single quotes instead of double quotes, and then we do like hello worlds, right, which also uses that same single quote, you're going to get an issue because you're using a single quote there, so the program system thinks that it's actually running into the end of your string. So in this case, double quotes is what you want to use. strings can get really complicated and pretty advanced, believe it or not. So we'll cover those in a future video all on their own. Let's go over real quick constants. So a constant variable is a variable that will not change. For example, you could use a constant variable to store a player's name, right? Player name, and we'll make this Bob. Or you could use it to store maybe the like the maximum number of lives that a player might have. We'll say max lives, and we'll set that to 5. Or maybe the maximum number of enemies that can appear on the screen, right? So these values typically do not change while the game is being played. So they're declared and assigned values the same way as other variables, as you saw, right? We still use the local keyword, the assignment operator. Whatever value is here is going to be stored in that variable. The major difference is how we're using our naming convention. We're no longer using camel case. These are going to be in all caps, and any spaces, because if we didn't have an underscore there, then it's hard to see where any spaces are in this, so we actually use an underscore for our spaces. And that denotes that this is a constant variable. It is also important to note, though, that there is nothing causing the system to allow me to change this, or preventing me from changing whatever this variable is. The nice part is, though, is when you start typing in like max lives and you go, I see, that's in all capital letters, so that's a constant. I can't change that here. I don't want to reassign that. So the main reason of having it in all caps is to notify us, the human beings reading the code and actually typing the code out, to know that we should not be changing this value unless we change it up at the top of our code, or wherever this variable is actually declared. All right, so let's talk a little bit deeper about strings. Like I said, I'm gonna have a whole video on that for even more, but one major thing that we do with strings is combining them. So we can combine strings in Lua by using string concatenations. There's a few ways to do this. The most common is 2 dots. So for example, we'll go ahead and do a print statement here, and we will do a hello, and I hit a space here, and then we're gonna do another space, 2 dots, another space, and then we'll do world. And this will print out hello world like this. So we have joined the string on the left side of our 2 dots with the string on the right side of our 2 dots, and it will come out as hello world. In fact, if I run this, you can see there it is, hello world. Alternatively, we can also use variables in our string concatenation. Concatenation is, I'll spell that here, or attempt to. Concatenation, I always spell it wrong, but there we go. Concatenation, so it's a fun word to say sometimes, a little hard, but it's fun. So if I want to do a hello and concatenate with my player name, right? And this should print hello Bob in this case, because remember, we're storing Bob inside of our player name. So if I run this now, there we are, we have hello Bob. It's useful to note as well that I'm including a space after my hello within my quotations, and that gives me the space in here. If I didn't have this, this actually will smush up the 2 things for us, right? So now if we look at it, it's hello Bob without the space. So that is important to note, that if you are doing string concatenation, that you want to make sure you're including spaces where they make sense. There's another way to do concatenation, as I mentioned, that makes it a little easier, as well as the fact that concatenation using this method can get kind of messy. It can get a little long if you're working with a lot of data and variables. So again, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell to be notified when I put my more in-depth strings video out, to see a better way of handling this. Future me editing this video. I had planned on putting both variables and basic math into one video, and then I looked at the timing and realized that my variable video already went close to 15 minutes, and together it was going to be over 30 minutes, and I just didn't want to do that. I want to keep my videos a little shorter, so I'm actually going to put a cut in here. We'll pick up in the next video and actually do the basic math encoding there. All right, I'll see you next time. Thank you.